The Book of Enoch Introduction. As the Book of Enoch is, in some respects, the most notable extant apocalyptic work outside the canonical scriptures, it will not be inappropriate to offer a few remarks here on the apocalyptic literature generally. In writing about the books which belong to this literature, Professor Burkitt says very pointedly that they are the most characteristic survival of what I will venture to call, with all its narrowness and its incoherence, the heroic age of Jewish history, the age when the nation attempted to realize in action the part of the peculiar people of God. It ended in catastrophe, but the nation left two successors, the Christian Church and the rabbinical schools, each of which carried on some of the old national aims. And of the two, it was the Christian Church that was most faithful to the ideas enshrined in the Apocalypse, and it did consider itself, not without some reason, the fulfillment of those ideas. What is wanted, therefore, in studying the Apocalypse is, above all, sympathy with the ideas that underlie them, and especially with the belief in the new age. And those who believe that in Christianity a new era really did dawn for us out, I think to have that sympathy. We study the Apocalypse to learn how our spiritual ancestors hoped against hope, that God would make all right in the end, and that we, their children, are here today studying them as indication that their hope was not wholly unfounded. Hope is indeed the main underlying motive power which prompted the writers of the Apocalypse. And this hope is the more intensive and ardent in that it shines forth from a background which is dark with despair. For the Apocalypse despaired of the world in which they lived, a world in which the godly were of no account, while the wicked seemed too often triumphant and prosperous. While the evil was everywhere around, the Apocalypse saw no hope for the world as it was. For such a world there was no remedy, only destruction. And if the good were ever to triumph, it must be in a new world. Despairing, therefore, of the world around them, the Apocalypse centered their hope upon a world to come, where the righteous would come to their own and evil would find no place. It is this thought which underlines the opening words of the Book of Enoch, the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. Nowhere in this book is the essence of this hope more beautifully expressed than in a short metrical piece in this first chapter. But with the righteous he will make peace, and will protect the elect, and mercy shall be upon them. They shall all belong to God. They shall all be prospered. They shall all be blessed. And he will help them all, and light shall appear unto them, and he will make peace with them. In all the books belonging to this literature, which have come down to us, this hope is expressed more or less vividly, nor is the dark background wanting with prophecies of coming wrath. It will therefore be realized that the apocalyptic literature is almost wholly concerned with the future. It is true that again and again the apocalyptic glances at the contemporary history of the world around him, to which many a cryptic reference is made, a fact which necessitates some knowledge of the history of this period for a full understanding of the book in question, but these references are only made with a view to comforting the oppressed and afflicted with the thought that even the most mighty of earthly powers are shortly to be overthrown by the advent of the new and glorious era, when every injustice and all the incongruities of life will be done away with, so that every reference to the present is merely a position taken upon from which to point to the future. Now, since as we have seen, the apocalyptic despair of any bettering of the present world, and therefore contemplate its destruction as the preliminary of the new order of things, they look away from this world in their visions of the future, and they conceive of otherworldly forces coming into play in the reconstitution of things, and of society generally. And since these are otherworldly forces, the supernatural plays a great part in the apocalyptic literature. The supernatural coloring will often strike the reader of this literature as fantastic and at times bizarre, but this should not be permitted to obscure the reality which often lies behind these weird shadows. Mental visions are not always easily expressed in words, and the seer who in a vision has received a message in some fantastic guise necessarily has the impress upon his mind of what he has seen when giving his message. And when he describes his vision, the picture he presents is, in the nature of the case, more fantastic to the ear of the hearer than to the eye of him who saw it. Allowance should be made for this, especially by us Westerns, who are so lacking in the rich imaginativeness of the Oriental. Our love of literalness hinders the play of the imagination because we are so apt to materialize a mental picture presented by another. The Apocalyptics was written by and for Orientals. This is quite a long introduction. Bear with me. Okay. Um, so, mhm. So it was written for the Orientals, and we cannot do justice to them unless we remember this. But it would be best if we could get into the Oriental mind and look at things from that point of view. Another thing which the reader of the apocalyptic literature must be prepared for is the frequent inconsistency of thought to be found there, together with variableness of teaching, often involving contradiction. Ah. The reason of this is not to be sought simply in the fact that in the apocalyptics the hand of more than one author is frequently to be discerned, a fact which would easily account for divergence of views in one and the same book. No, the chief reason is that, on the one hand, the minds of the apocalyptics were saturated with the traditional thought and ideas of the Old Testament. And on the other, they were eagerly absorbing the newer conceptions which the spirit of the age had brought into being. This occasioned a continual conflict of thought in their minds, and the endeavor to harmonize the old and the new would not always succeed. And in consequence, there often resulted a compromise which was illogical and which presented contradictions. Inconsistency of teaching on certain points is therefore not surprising under the circumstances. Again, to realize the significance of much that is found in these apocalypses, one has to reckon with a rigid predestinarianism, which was characteristic of the apocalyptics as a whole. They started with the absolute conviction that the whole course of the world, from beginning to end, both as regards its physical changes and also in all that concerns the history of nations, their growth and decline, and of every single individual, was in every respect predetermined by God Almighty before all time. This belief of the apocalyptics is well illustrated in one of the later apocalyptics by these words. For he hath weighed the age in the balance, and by number hath he numbered the seasons. Neither will he move nor stir things till the measure appointed be fulfilled. Thus, the times and periods of the courses of the world's history have been predetermined by God. The numbers of the years have been exactly fixed. This was a fundamental postulate of the apocalyptics, who devoted much of their energy to calculations, based upon a close study of prophecy, as to the exact period when history should reach its consummation. The underlying idea is predestinarian. But all these things, according to the apocalypse, were divine secrets hidden from the beginning of the world, but revealed to God-fearing men, to whom was according the faculty of peering into the hidden things of God and of understanding them. Upon these men was laid the privilege of duty of revealing the divine secrets to others, hence their name of apocalyptics or revealers. It was because the apocalyptics believed so firmly in this power which they possessed of looking into the deep things of God that they claimed to be able to measure the significance of what had happened in the past and of what was happening in the present. And upon the basis of this knowledge, they believed that they had also had the power given them by God, of foreseeing the march of future events, above all, of knowing when the end of the world would come, a consummation towards which the whole history of the world had been tending from the beginning. And in spite of all the mysticism, sometimes of a rather fantastic kind, and of the frequently supra-mundane visions with which the apocalyptic literature abounds, the apocalyptics fully realized the need of practical religion. They were upholders of the law, the loyal observance of which they regard as the necessary for all God-fearing men. In this, the apocalyptics were at one in principle with Pharisaism, but their conception of what constituted loyal observance of the law differed from that of the Pharisees, for unlike these, the apocalyptics laid all stress on the spirit of its observance rather than upon the letter. Characteristic of their attitude here are the words in Enoch, verse 4. But ye have not been steadfast, nor done the commandments of the Lord, but ye have turned away, have spoken proud and hard words with your impure mouths against his greatness. O ye hard-hearted, ye shall find no peace. And again, woe to them that pervert the words of uprightness and transgress the eternal law. We do not find in this literature that insistence on the literal carrying out of the unionist precepts of the law, which was characteristic of Pharisaism. Veneration for the law is wholehearted. It is the real guide of life. Punishment awaits those who ignore its guidance. But the Pharisaic interpretation of the law and its requirements is alien to the spirit of the apocalyptics. As a whole, the apocalyptic literature presents an universalistic attitude, very different from the nationalistic narrowness of the Pharisees. And it's true, the apocalyptics are not always consistent in this, but normally they embrace the Gentiles equally with the men of their own nation, and in the divine scheme of salvation. And in the same way, the wicked who are excluded are not restricted to the Gentiles, but the Jews equally with them shall suffer torment where hereafter according to their deserts. The apocalyptic literature, as distinct from the apocalyptic movement, owing to which it took its rise, began to come into existence about the period 200-150 BC. And at any rate, the earliest example of this literature, the earliest portions of the book of Enoch belonging to this period, works of an apocalyptic character continue to be written for about 3 centuries. The fourth book of Esdras, one of the most remarkable apocalypses belonging to the end of the first Christian century approximately. There are apocalypses of later date, and some of subordinate interest are of much later date, but the real period of the apocalyptic literature is from about 200 BC to about AD 100. Its beginnings date, therefore, from a time prior to that great landmark in Jewish history, the Maccabean era. The Book of Enoch, component parts, and their dates. I will continue this in a new video.